So good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Good to see you all again in 2022. Um, so my name is Shuzo Bed. I am one of the priests with the Dragonfly Sangha, and I wanted to kick off a new series that Mike and I will be sharing with you over the next few weeks on the worldly winds or the eight worldly concerns. Pardon me. Um, so what are the eight worldly winds? I know for me, I did not encounter these early on in my Buddhist practice and in my study. But the eight worldly winds, or the eight worldly concerns, or the eight worldly dharmas, as they're sometimes called, um, were shared with us in the Lokavipatti Sutra, or the Worldly Concerns Sutra. And essentially, these are four pairs of things that can trip us up in our lives. Four pairs of things that are typically, conventionally seen as good and bad. So there's eight overall, and they're paired up into four groups. So the four pairs are gain and loss, status and disgrace, praise and blame, and pleasure and pain. And like I said, the Buddha called out that, for most of us, for the average person, for the person who is not practicing, and even for those who are practicing, these can be really tricky. And I'm going to talk a bit about gain and loss in this evening's talk, but I wanted to talk about the winds, the eight worldly winds, kind of at a high level first. Um, so, like I said, the Buddha said that these can be kind of a tough thing. Because as I read that list, you probably realize, well, before, those things aren't bad. Gain, status, praise, pleasure, those are all good words. Why wouldn't I want those things? And of course, the bad ones, loss, disgrace, blame, and pain, I can see why I would want to avoid those things. Because there's a lot of social conditioning that we have around those words, so that I didn't need to tell you which ones were good and bad. You could know just from hearing them. And it's easy for us to want to chase after the four good ones and avoid the four bad ones. But the point with this sutra is that all of them can throw us off. All of them can cause suffering. And the problem arises when we start to build our lives around these eight winds, and we're always trying to go after the good stuff, and we're always trying to get rid of the bad stuff. Because here's the thing, most of us, it's not weird to try to, welcome in good things to your life and keep out the bad things, right? On a daily basis, a lot of us try to do that. But it can get a little intense when you try to do it a bit too much to kind of play that out. So if I say to you, well, I'm going to protect myself from all negativity whatsoever, so I'm going to, wear a helmet and pads all over my body so I never get hurt. I'm never going to go anywhere so I don't get lost or get into an accident or anything like that. I'm never going to leave my room. I only eat cold food, plain food, so I never get sick or anything like that. I'm not going to have any friends, so my heart's never broken. I never have any relationships end or anything like that. And obviously that's absurd, right? It's we can't protect ourselves from all negativity without going to extremes. And even if we would manage to do the things that I said and protect ourselves from a lot of, the vicissitudes of life, that can be staved off by, staying inside and wearing pads all day, chances are we're not going to be very happy. We're not going to experience a lot of depth in our life, and quite frankly, a lot of growth comes from when we go through difficulties and when we struggle. And on the other side of things, if I would say, well, you know what, I'm resolved to only accept the positive things in life. I'm going to insist on being entertained every moment of every day. I want my team to win every game, and if I ever play a board game with friends, I need to win all of those too. And every day I need something exciting. it's exhausting and it's not realistic. Um, and again, it doesn't allow us to grow through those experiences of, well, you know what, we didn't win today. So what can we do differently? Or maybe it's okay to not win all the time. Things like that. And here's the thing. This actually ties in with the Buddha's story. This notion of all good and no bad. Because in the story that we have about the Buddha, the legend of his childhood, his father wanted him to be this great ruler and he wanted him to always be happy. Um, and so he kept him in the palace, locked up with games and all manner of pleasures, um, pardon me, all day long. And for many years, the Buddha was like, hey, this is great. Life is wonderful, all this good stuff. Probably didn't have a lot of words to describe bad things in life. But then, of course, we know the story where he goes out and he takes a few trips outside of the castle, and then he sees, old age, he sees sickness, he sees death. Um, and then he sees an ascetic, and he's like, huh, oh goodness, these bad things that I saw, could that happen to me? And then suddenly in comes this sense of worry and fear and suffering, right? And when the Buddha goes off and he eventually sits beneath the Bodhi tree and he realizes these things about life, and he decides he's going to give this sermon at the deer park. And one of the first things he says is like, look guys, there's suffering, there's bad stuff in the world. It's his diagnosis about life, his way of saying, like, let's be honest here. Sometimes life can be really tough. It's not just about, hey, here's a spiritual path where everything's always going to be good. It's the fact that, you know what, things are going to trip us up, right? And that's why when he's talking in the Lokavapati Sutra, he says that most of us, when we're blown back and forth by these winds, of gain and loss and pleasure and pain, we don't, we suffer as a result of that, because we only want the good things and we cling to those good things and we don't want to lose them. And then if we do lose things, then we really suffer, because so much of our identity and our worth was wrapped up in those. And that's why in that sutra, the Worldly Concern Sutra, the Buddha says, like, look, hey, most of us, we're blown about by these winds. That's why he used that notion of a wind, right? It buffets us. It blows us this way and that. We welcome gain. We resist loss. And all that welcoming and resisting causes a lot of struggle in our lives. But if we realize that gain and loss are transient, pleasure, pain, and all the other worldly winds, that they're impermanent, then we can be swept away by them less often and actually use them as a way to learn about ourselves and about life in general. And I want to mention briefly, too, there is a difference between pain and suffering, right? A lot of times we use those words together. We say, well, there was a lot of, pain and suffering, or sometimes we use those words interchangeably. But they are different, especially in the context of our practice. And one way that they're very different is that pain is oftentimes an inevitability in life, right? We get sick. We feel uncomfortable. We stub our toe. We lose someone or something really important in our life. But suffering is not inevitable. Suffering tends to be the story we tell ourselves about our pain. And when we're oriented around our ego self, which it lives in this world of, this thing I have is permanent and it needs to stay here, and this thing that I don't want, this illness or whatever, is never going to happen to me, right? Speaks a lot in absolutes. That's where suffering comes from, because then when we do experience some kind of pain, it shatters the world that we've kind of built for ourselves. We're like, well, it wasn't supposed to be like that, and then we really suffer there, and we tell ourselves all these stories around why it shouldn't have happened, and the way it should be, and all of these shoulds and things like that. But here's the thing: the our reactions to pain and loss, and even to gain, quite frankly, can tell us a lot about ourselves, and they can be great opportunities for us to ask good questions about ourselves and understand ourselves a little better. In our practice, we talk a lot about, or we talk about how feelings can be mindfulness spells, where when we have a feeling about a thing, a thought arises and then a feeling pops up, oftentimes that's an opportunity for us to stop and think like, oh, what is making that feeling come to be? What thought gave rise to that feeling? And as we practice, we have the opportunity for those feelings to serve as bells to say, hey, you're having that feeling, pay attention here. Or, pardon me, you're having that feeling, let's ask ourselves what might be causing that, right? Why did I have that reaction? Maybe I can unpack that a little bit, run myself through the four questions in our practice to kind of, like I said, learn a bit more about that feeling that's arising. And this can be a good practice of paying attention to our feelings in response to gain, or when there's something maybe that we really want, and we're like, man, if only I had this thing, then I would be really happy. We're really getting blown by that wind of gain, right? That worldly wind of gain. But to ask ourselves, like, okay, well, why do I think that? What about that thing would enhance my being? When did we first realize that we wanted that thing, right? And just analyze it. Ask ourselves, where did that come from? And the same thing in response to loss. If we're afraid to lose something, or if we've lost something and we're having a very, very strong reaction, why is that thing important to me? Why is that person important to me? What if I did lose that thing? What then? And kind of play that out in our minds, and sort of understand why that fear, that anxiety is arising around that notion of loss, right? And try to realize what thought brought that feeling into being, and listen to the resonance of that mindfulness bell. I know for me, a personal experience of mine of loss, years ago, I think about 10, 11 years ago, I lost my job. The company I was working for closed, and I felt bad about it, right? I mean, obviously there's the notion of, well, I need to be able to pay my bills. I need to be able to feed myself. But as I thought about that loss and that big change that had happened in my life, I realized that there was also this feeling of worthlessness in there too. That it wasn't just anxiety around being able to support myself, but there was this sensation of, well, wow, you don't have a job. That means you're kind of worthless. And I had to stop and think about that. Be like, well, why do I feel that? Is it because there's a sense of I'm not contributing, to society? Is it that, all my friends had jobs? My dad had worked at the same company for, almost 50 years, and that he had that stability, and am I not good enough to have that stability, right? All of these things got swirled up and stirred up by that wind of loss, because I was really resisting it. But then I realized, and it was a voice coming out of my true self saying, well, wait a minute. You're not worthless. You have friends and family who love you, and there's plenty of things about you that have nothing to do with you having a job right now. You'll get another job. Things will be okay, right? But I got, pardon me, I got caught up in a story where losing my job meant that I mattered less. But I realized that just wasn't true on a fundamental level, right? No, obviously, in a conventional sense, yes, I wanted to get another job so that I could support myself. But it wasn't being driven by this sense of worth, right? And I wasn't suffering as a result of that loss. And the wind of loss, therefore, wasn't affecting me quite as much. So, with these winds that can affect us, right? Either the negative ones, the negative one of loss, where we're afraid of losing something, or we've lost something and we're having a reaction to that, or of gain, where we feel we need that thing to be worth something, or we'd be happy if we only had that thing, or now we have that thing and we're really nervous about something happening to it, right? It's going to get broken or stolen, or it's going to wear out or whatever. Um, we need something more stable than just this conventional notion of chase after gain and avoid loss, right? And that stable thing is our Buddha nature. That part of us, our true self, that part of us that isn't affected by what we have and don't have, that isn't affected by what we gain or we lose, right? Because our true self recognizes that no addition or subtraction can impact us intrinsically, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, my true self is always a 10. And there's nothing that I can get, not a better job, a nicer car, a new relationship, that's going to take that higher than that. And likewise, or is going to, like, maybe I'm actually at a 9.5, but if I had that thing, then I'd be at a 10, then it would be all okay. No, you're at a 10 already. And there's nothing that I can lose. No relationship that can fall apart. No job that I can lose. No financial hit that I can take that is going to make me anything other than a 10. In that sense of the true self, through the lens and the orientation of my Buddha nature. And, one of the things that we can do in this sense of stability and building a sense of equanimity to kind of keep us from being blown this way and that, well, it's to develop a sense of equanimity, right? There's a great story that outlines a sense of equanimity that you may have heard before. It's one of my favorite stories. It's always stuck in my head. But it's of a farmer who he has a horse. He and his son live on a farm, and they have a horse. And one day the horse runs away, lost, right? And all his neighbors come over and say, "Oh man, I'm really sorry about your horse running away. That really stinks, right?" And the guy's like, "Well, maybe, we'll see." And then a few days later, the horse comes back, and the horse has with it another horse. Hey, now I have 2 horses. This is great. All the neighbors come over again. They're like, "How nice for you," right? This gain of a second horse, right? And the farmer's like, "We'll see," And then so his son is like, "Well, we need to have this second horse trained." So he goes out to train the new horse, and he's working with it, and he gets thrown off the horse's back, and he breaks his leg. And now he can't help with the farm work. He can't train the other horse. The neighbors come over, and they're commiserating the loss of the son's health. It's like, "Oh man, that's too bad." And the farmer's like, "We'll see. Maybe." And then, this story taking place in a particularly violent period of history, there are warlords who are going around and recruiting people into the army. And this local warlord comes by to take young men into his army to go and fight. And he sees the farmer's son there, and he has a broken leg, and he's like, "Well, I can't take this guy with me." So he rides on, and all the neighbors come over and they say, "Oh, thank goodness. You didn't have to lose your son to that senseless war." And the farmer's like, "Maybe. We'll see." And the thing here is not that, we shouldn't interpret this that the farmer didn't love his son. He didn't, care for his horse. Or wasn't happy when he got another horse or anything like that. It's just that the farmer was approaching these gains and losses with a sense of equanimity, recognizing that everything is impermanent, everything is transient. He himself, the farmer, his horses, the number of horses, his son's health, And so when these things happen, he's not, giving himself over to the voices, whether they're in his own head or of his neighbors coming over and saying, like, oh, hey, you know, this is a really good thing. You should be really happy about this. Or, oh, this is a really bad thing. You should be really down in the dumps about this. And that's also not to say that we shouldn't celebrate when good things come into our lives and be grateful. My last Dharma talk, I talked a lot about gratitude, right? Absolutely, we should be grateful when good things come into our lives. And there should even be a sense of gratitude when we lose things, to recognize, like, hey, it hurts me. That pain is there because that thing was important to me. But those losses and those gains, they don't define us. They don't make us worth any more or less. And we can live with that sense of equanimity in the face of that change, in the face of those wins. So equanimity is that quality of staying steady and not being blown back and forth. And that's only possible when we reorient ourselves from our ego self that is all concerned with, if only I had this, and so long as I keep this, then I'm okay. And then maybe I can be on a 5 or a 6 on that scale of 1 to 10. Changing our orientation to our true self, which knows we're already a 10. And there's nothing that can change that. And then also understanding that generally we're not in control of the things that happen to us, right? What a relief, right? We are in control of how we react to those things. But we can't control everything that happens to us, right? Understanding that everything is transient, everything is impermanent. Everything good that we have will one day go away. Same thing with everything bad that might be happening in our lives right now. It's also going to go away. It's temporary, right? And that none of those wins, none of the 8 wins, the good ones or the bad ones, can affect our intrinsic value. So, I hope that these words were helpful. If this is something that maybe you're struggling with, maybe you have gone through a loss and you're like, you know what, I feel the pain of that loss and I'm suffering a lot because of it, and you would like to talk to someone, I would encourage you to reach out to us at AskSenseiTony.com or at DragonflySangha.com. And you can reach us. We offer counseling and mindfulness services. Or maybe you recognize, you're like, you know what? Things are really good in my life, but boy, I have a lot of anxiety because I'm afraid of losing it. Or I feel like my value and my sense of self-worth is all wrapped up in everything that I have and everything that I'm able to do. And that causes you a lot of anxiety. I would encourage you to reach out to us. We can, we're happy to talk to you about, practices that might be helpful to you in that regard. So, thank you as always for your time. I hope you all have a great week, whatever the winds may bring you. And we'll talk to you again over the next few weeks about the other worldly winds.